First of all, welcome everyone that's out there virtually listening to us today. My name is Jason Aries, and I'm the Chief of Police with the Naperville Police Department, and I've been with the department for 24 years now. So I've got two other distinguished guests to help me with this webinar today, and we'll start with Andy. Andy, if you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick.
Sure, I'm Andy Hines. I'm with the Transportation Engineering and Development Business Group. I've also been with the city for 24 years.
Thanks, Andy.
I'm Derek Zook. I'm the traffic sergeant. I've been at the police department for 27 years.
Right. Thanks, Derek. And with that, I will kick off the presentation here. So a few housekeeping items as we get started. This webinar is being recorded, so we can put it on our website for any folks that were unable to attend and join us today for this presentation on traffic safety. Additionally, the chat is disabled. However, you can add questions to the Q&A, and we'll answer those that we have time for at the end of the presentation, and any that we don't, we can answer and put on YouTube with the video at a later time. So why are we here today? I think that's what we need to start with. One of the most common things that I hear or want to be discussed throughout the city are crashes and driving safety. So as I go to the next slide here and we talk about trends and data, post-COVID, while I'm having these discussions, I hear the roadways are more dangerous than they've ever been. People are driving in a manner they never have been, with no respect for the roadway, the rules of the road, et cetera, et cetera. For those of you that don't know that are with us today, one of my background, my bachelor's degree is in math with a statistical analysis focus. So whenever I hear stuff like that, it does force me to go back to the data to see if there's something that we're potentially missing as a department. And as you can see from these trends, we are still not to pre-COVID numbers in terms of traffic crashes that have occurred in our city. Now, unfortunately, in 2024, we have had more fatals than we've had in the last 6 years. Some of those pedestrian related, some of those single car related. So that would lend to, wow, people seem to be driving a little bit more recklessly. But when you look at the fact that we're still 600-700 crashes less than pre-COVID, and the injury crashes aren't as high as pre-COVID, that is something that, data tells us isn't necessarily there. Now, that doesn't mean as a police department and the folks in our traffic engineering group aren't always working and looking at ways to enhance roadway safety. But as you'll hear about later in the presentation, traffic and roadway safety is all of our jobs, not just the police department or the TED group. So as we look at 2024 data here, before I get into this let Sergeant Zook talk a little bit about this, you've got some shaded areas on here. I just want to give you some context of what we're looking at. So this area where these bubbles are is Route 59, Washington Street, Ogden Avenue, and 75th Street. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Sergeant Zook. And Derek, if you could kind of give us some detail on what we saw in 2024 and put a little more color around what this map is telling us.
So what we saw last year for our top three causes of crashes is actually the screen right there. Number one, failure to reduce speed, avoid a crash. Number two, failure to yield right away at an intersection. And number three, improper lane usage. The top two, failure to reduce speed and failure to yield right away, those are typically the top two that we've seen over, at least in my experience as a traffic sergeant, probably the past 10 years. But I think I need to talk a little bit more about failure to reduce speed. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a false sense that there's some sort of excessive speed involved in this, and that's not necessarily the case. So failure to reduce speed is something to the fact that you could be going the speed limit, 25 miles an hour and 25, and you ran a car in front of you. That's what we consider failure to reduce speed. So to avoid that, to avoid that citation or to avoid that crash, it's essentially more or less like falling too closely. So they used to teach a 2-second rule, the 3-second rule. If you maintain that 3-second rule from the car in front of you, and that car stops suddenly or stops for traffic, and you have that 3-second rule, then you should avoid that crash from occurring. So that's what we're seeing kind of in that number one category of failure to reduce speed, avoid a crash. Also with that too, there's distraction. Now our distraction numbers, People don't always admit to us that they're distracted while driving, but we do know that through our step grants, that I'll talk about later, that distraction is a key, either from cell phone usage, passengers in the car, radio, things such as that. So when you're not doing the 3-second rule, you're distracted, you may be going a little bit over the speed limit, but not too much. That's when we start seeing these crashes occur. Failure to yield the right of way. That's the one that we see where we get most of our injuries from. That's at major intersections where you're waiting to turn left. You're in the middle of the intersection, the light turns yellow, you panic and you turn right or left real quick, typically in front of another car, and that's where we see a T-bone type collision occur. And those are some of our most devastating crashes that we do see in the traffic unit. To avoid those, we encourage you, if you can't complete your left turn on the green or green arrow, we encourage you to stay behind that stop bar so you don't feel forced to make that left turn on a yellow or a red. For some reason, you're out in the intersection, the light does turn yellow, don't panic, don't turn in front of another car. You may have to wait till it turns red, and then you may have to make that turn. But we encourage you to stay behind that stop bar so you have to avoid that situation altogether. Proper lane usage, that's typically people are trying to merge into other lanes of traffic. Understand, use your turn signals. Your turn signal doesn't automatically mean that you get that right away to that lane you're trying to merge into. It's prudent upon you to either speed up or slow down to make that merge effective, okay? The turn signal just doesn't give you the right of way and merge over. We're seeing a lot of people just doing that and merging on into cars that are already occupying that lane. As we go through the map, like the chief talked about, if you look at it here, 59, 75th Street, Ogden Avenue, Washington Street, they all have one thing in common: high volumes of traffic. The more cars you put on those roadways, the more chances of crashes that are going to occur. So our top 10 intersections or our top 10 locations every year are our major roadways, such as 59, 75th, Washington, Naperville Boulevard's on there, Ogden Avenue. So we see a lot of crashes on those just because we have a lot of volume on those roadways.
Yeah, Derek, the downtown tends to have a lot of traffic as well, and we have quite a few down there. I think that's one of the center bubbles, right? What couple tips on when you're in a congested area like a downtown that we've seen? I know you've talked about that before.
Yeah, the biggest thing is keeping that distance from the car in front of you. That 3-second, 2-second, I know when you get into close quarters that you kind of tend to get real close to the car in front of you, but if you keep those distances, you'll avoid that failure to reduce, that rear end crash that we see a lot. The closer you get the car in front of you, the more chances of that failure to reduce, that rear end crash increases. So keep your distance, pay attention to what's going on around you, focus on driving the car.
Yeah, I think that's great, Derek. You know, the one you brought up, and I just want to add one more thing with the left-hand turns, because I thought it was really important what you emphasized there. The one piece that, you know, I have a young daughter that I'm teaching to drive right now, and advice I give to her and I give to everybody in the community: if you happen to find yourself in the intersection, like Derek had mentioned, and the light turns red, do yourself a favor and wait till you see everybody in the opposite direction of you stopped, because that outside lane of traffic sometimes is a big blind lane, we call it. So we think people are going to stop because the light has now turned red. And we all stress because the other lanes of traffic now want to go. So we get panicky, as Derek had mentioned. But do us all a favor, until you see all lanes of traffic stopped, or you're absolutely certain that there's not a car in that outside lane in that major blind spot, don't make that turn, because we do have quite a few of those where somebody goes through that red light. And as Derek mentioned, those left-hand turn crashes are some of our worst. So whether it's you or you're giving advice to family members, we want you to stay behind the stop bar. If you end up in the intersection and the light starts to change, you're not sure if you can go yet, really be conscientious of that outside lane for safety. Moving on to the next slide here, as we get into prevention, Derek, there's a lot I don't think the public realizes that we do behind the scenes and the approach we take to reduce traffic crashes. Can you touch on these three important things and how we kind of tackle that as a police department?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of introduce these to you, and then we're going to talk about these in a little greater detail. So when I receive a complaint, or when Andy receives a complaint at TED, we look at these three factors. And every Wednesday afternoon, we actually meet as a group to discuss complaints that come in. So we look at engineering, and I'll let Andy talk more about engineering. And from the police department side, we really look at enforcement and education. And we call these the 3 E's: engineering, enforcement, and education. Together with those, we come up with a plan or solution towards the complaint that comes in. But I'll let Andy maybe explain a bit more about the engineering aspect here.
Yeah, perfect segue, Derek. Thanks. So Andy, I don't think I like that Derek mentioned the partnership that PD and Ted has, but Ted has a lot to do on the engineering side with the roadways and working to keep them safe. So can you kind of talk about your team's role in this in our community with keeping roadways safe?
Absolutely. Yeah, so our transportation and engineering teams in the TED Business Group partner with the police department and our public works department to address traffic safety in a few ways. One is through review of traffic studies, and I'll discuss that more in a few minutes. Sign changes, pavement markings, traffic signal adjustments, or driver feedback signs are a few examples of those. And when modifications are warranted, these types of measures can be implemented in sometimes a few days, or it could be a few months. Um, for the other type of modifications that we do are a little bit more complex, and those are changes to the roadway or intersection configurations. These changes are typically very expensive and will take years to sometimes a decade to implement. A few examples include improvements to North Aurora Road west of Route 59 that was recently completed, or modifications to the 75th and Washington intersection that was completed back in the early 2010s. In addition to providing more roadway capacity, safety measures such as street lighting, improved bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and protected left turn movements can be included in the scope of these types of projects. The city is currently in the process of updating our road improvement plan that will identify these types of projects for future evaluation and consideration through a preliminary engineering study. More information about this update is available on the city's project webpage. One other thing I do want to mention is that there are many agencies that maintain streets in Naperville. So roads like Route 59 or Ogden Avenue, those are state highways maintained by IDOT. 75th Street's a DuPage County highway, and there are many township roads like Book Road south of 75th Street. So the city coordinates with our partner agencies, but each agency has its own processes and slightly different standards or approaches with respect to traffic-related items.
Thanks, Andy. The next 2 E's, enforcement and education, kind of go hand in hand, because sometimes when we're enforcing the laws as a police department, we're doing a little bit of education at the same time. The other thing I want the community, which you all realize, is kind of how we deploy our people. You heard me mention earlier the statistical background, and we're a big believer in data-driven policing. So that heat map that we showed you earlier, we make those areas focal points for our patrol division and our traffic unit, which we'll get into a little bit more to focus on during their unallocated time. That's the time they're not responding to calls for service or things of that nature. We will push our folks in the different beats to focus on those areas in their beats. The other thing we do is we'll deploy our people based on traffic complaints and some of the data we get from that to determine the validity. Because there are some traffic complaints we get where there's the occasional outlier, but it's not a regular recurring problem. And with that, I kind of want to turn over to Derek. Can you get more into the traffic unit, their role, and then the traffic unit really controls a lot of the education we push out, Derek. So just kind of talk about that with the education and enforcement and what you guys do.
Yeah, so the traffic unit, we're ultimately responsible for directing the enforcement efforts for the entire department, the education efforts for the entire department. And one of our abilities is investigating all these serious injury fatality crashes. So we see a lot of this firsthand. Now, how do we attack enforcement and education? Well, we use what we call Sustained Traffic Enforcement Program, otherwise known as STEP grant. A lot of you probably see the Facebook posts reference step grants for DUIs, or like this month is distracted driving month, so we put a post out for distracted driving. But we gear our enforcements through the step grants, which are essentially DUI enforcement, seatbelt enforcement, distracted driving, and speed enforcement. And the state and the federal government have decided that these factors or these violations are what we're seeing causing the majority of the crashes throughout the country, including Naperville, and we're causing the most serious injuries or fatalities. So we really hone in on those violations in our high volume areas where we have the high volume of traffic areas, which, like you said before, 59, 75th Street, things such as that. With the STEP program comes education too, and that's all through our social media posts, our media posts, educating the public that we're doing this, and then educating the public what the results were after all our campaigns. So here in the next 2 weeks or so, you'll see something from us reference how we did in our distracted driving campaign so far for April. We also use the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration communication calendar. Every month they have some sort of enforcement. It pretty much mirrors the STEP grant to some extent. Like this month again, in their calendar is distracted driving. I believe I can't think of what next month is, but every month they have some area that they want local police departments to focus on in regards to violations. And the whole goal of that is just to reduce the serious crashes and fatalities throughout Naperville and the United States.
All right, gentlemen, kind of open-ended here on my part. Where do you see the most complaints? And why don't we start with Andy? Where do you see the most complaints, Andy, and how are they dealt with?
Well, I'd say the concerns are throughout Naperville, and they vary in nature. A lot are sometimes they start out as a request for a stop sign, but really the root issue is more speeding related. So if the public has a concern about a traffic issue in a particular location on a city street, they're welcome to submit a request through the Help Center on the city's webpage. And these requests will be assigned to a member of our team for evaluation. For most types of requests, the city has an established data-driven approach and review process. And these are based on, a combination of local, state, and federal policies, procedures, and criteria. For requests located within neighborhoods such as speeding, we'll typically apply the measured speed data against criteria established in the city's traffic calming toolkit, which is available on the city's website as well. If the criteria are not met, then no action is typically recommended. If the criteria are met, then our team will discuss potential mitigation measures. And these measures are usually applied in an iterative manner, with the simplest measure implemented first, with consideration of supplemental measures if supported by follow-up data. In situations that can benefit from enforcement, speed data is shared with the police department so that their resources can be allocated to those hours with the highest measured speeds. And we receive a large number of these requests. So depending on the volume and the time of year, maybe several months before we're able to collect the necessary data to conduct that evaluation. But we will get to it.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think one of the misnomers, Andy, is that a lot of the complaints that we get and we do get a lot on some of the major roadways, but can you talk a little bit about, isn't it more where people spend most of their time, where they see the most complaints? And where is that?
Yeah, a lot of the complaints are in the neighborhoods, on in front of people's houses is usually where people are concerned. And a lot of it has to do, I think, with a lot of what we see is that, your perception of speed might be different than the measured speeds, and that's why we take that data-driven approach. And I think that really helps to, build that understanding of what, actual conditions are.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Derek, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Andy. Majority of the complaints that I see on my end are coming from the residential areas, speed-related stop sign type issues. And what we found out again, this is my 7th year in the traffic unit as a sergeant. And what I've seen over those 7 years is majority of the people that are violating the speed limits or the stop signs are your own neighbors. So we strongly encourage like HOAs to get their messages out to your own neighbors to slow down, to stop the stop signs, because that's what we're typically seeing is the neighbors that are violating these speed limit signs and the stop signs. Other than that, Chief, I think Andy's pretty much said it all.
Yeah, he has. And I think one thing that I really like to dovetail into that you both have heard, and I've heard as the chief, because I get a lot of these calls as well, is the traffic problems in our neighborhoods are 24/7, 365. And the three of us can tell you, we've got over 75 years of experience on this call. It's generally not. So you're helping this because the TED group does a great job, and we have some tools to grab the data too at the police department, is really help us where you really do see the bulk of their speeding. Give us the hours, and generally it's probably rush hour, but maybe there's an anomaly here or there. But the better you can drill down for us, the better we can deploy our people to help that problem. And as Derek said, and I think Andy mentioned it too, usually our first call is going to be to the HOA or a management group of an HOA to put stuff on your neighborhood social media pages. Like we've called the police and we've asked for extra enforcement because of speeding, stop signs, etc. But really narrowing that down helps us, because when we do gather data through these speed gathering devices and traffic volume counters, it generally is a couple hours a day, not every hour of every day in neighborhoods where we see speeding issues. There'll be a car or two in a 60-minute period, but when with limited resources, and that's not a complaint, that's just reality. If we see one or two speeders in an hour somewhere, that's probably not the most advantageous spot for us to put our people. We're going to put it to another area with a different type of data measure. So just something I always like to inform the public about. The more intel you can give us, the better we can deploy and then strategize on that problem. And while that brings us to the end of our presentation, and we'll open the Q&A in a second, I want to end with this, and it's something that I've been saying at just about every community presentation I've done in 2025. The police department, our TED group, the city as a whole, we absolutely have a role in traffic safety. But no matter what we do on a daily basis, I can tell you, we've tried everything. It is not going to eliminate traffic crashes in our town. It's not going to eliminate speeding vehicles. We can put a lot of resources in an area, a lot of strategies, and it'll mitigate it for a period of time. But the only true measure of what's going to help us stop having crashes in our town is for every one of us who's given the privilege to drive to truly make a conscientious effort to follow the rules of the road. Every presentation I've gone to, and we can't see you right now and you can't see us, but I asked the room to raise their hands if they've ever sped more than 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. And as you would guess, everybody in the room raises their hands. And I go through a series of things because we've all violated traffic laws. I'll put my hand up right now. I have. The key is if we can set it up where we're not doing any more, and this is roadway condition specific, more than 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. Keep your cell phone not only out of your hand, keep it out of your view. Our cars now have essentially mini TVs in them. Limit the distractions, limit your speed, because the only thing that's going to do that is if we all as a community make that effort to drive more responsibly. That is what could potentially get us to what I can tell you, our 3 goal right here is 0 traffic crashes. It's a devastating thing to happen, but it will not get there. We will work towards it, but without those getting behind the wheel of a vehicle, we're not going to be there unless we all make that effort to do that. So with that, I'm going to open up the Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen here. Open up the Q&A. So we have an anonymous attendee. This gets a little specific about, so Andy, I'm going to start you with this one and do the best you can. It doesn't make sense to me that the criteria for speeding data is 85% of the traffic going 9 miles per hour or less than the speed limit. Where does that level come from?
So what we do use the 85th percentile, and this is in our traffic calming toolkit. That's an industry-wide standard. So that's saying 85% of the vehicles on the street are going that speed or less. Where the criteria comes from in the toolkit, that's based on our hundreds of traffic studies that we've done over decades, and we have established different speeds for different speed ranges for different classifications of streets. So we have different types of streets. The higher volume streets are arterials or collectors, and then we have neighborhood connectors and local streets, and we have different ranges for each one of those. But that's the criteria are based on, like I said, a history of traffic studies that we've done. And, we're looking for the outliers, because, like the chief said, I mean, I can count on my, on my two hands how many times we've done a speed study and we've found the 85th percentile speed to be less than the posted speed limit. And generally, there is some amount of speeding on almost every street. So, um, our toolkit is set up to treat the streets where they're out of the normal range.
Thanks, Andy. And I am not seeing any other questions, so thank you for those that were in attendance today and spent about a half hour with us, just learning a little bit more about what we're doing to keep our roadways safe. I would ask you to share this. This will be out there in social media land for everybody to see and get some quick tips that you had from our two experts. And I really implore them to listen to my message because, again, we have a role and we will do our role, but we need everybody to jump in and help us keep the roadway safe by driving responsibly on a daily basis. So thanks. Oh, you know what? You caught me. I got one more question that came in. So we got a thank you from an anonymous attendee. You're welcome. We're happy to do this and happy to connect with everyone. And especially the hotline number. And please keep an eye out for the web portal we're opening because it's really going to help us track better, even better than we already are, our traffic complaints and the data around them. So that's coming very soon from the police department. The question, guys, and either one of you can take this, do we concentrate enforcement heavily on evenings during nice weather? Because this resident or community member says what they've seen lately, Naperville is a racetrack on nice days. So would either one of you like to touch on that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the nicer the weather, the more vehicles that are out there, motorcycles, you name it, people are out moving around, and traffic's becomes a little bit hectic. And in certain cases, you have like the racetrack person talked about, and we do try to focus our enforcement around that. However, warmer weather, more cars, more people are out, more things are occurring, more calls for service. And the chief could probably answer a little bit more to this better. More calls for service, other things that we're pulling patrol officers for. So when we have time and availability, and we're not handling other emergency calls, yes, try to go out and do those enforcement areas where we're seeing, such as the racetrack areas. But again, warmer weather, call volumes are probably going to go up. We're going to be seeing more emergency calls, so we may not necessarily have the staffing to respond to all those traffic. Chief, is that kind of?
Yeah, realistically, I will say our highest call volume just about every day of the week is a stretch from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon till about 8, 9 o'clock at night. So that's where we say that, like what Sergeant Zook was talking about, highest concentration of calls we're being dispatched to. So that unallocated time I spoke of earlier, that's time when the beat officers and the other officers on the street are free and not responding to 911 calls or other calls for service in the community. So when they are tied up with that, it lessens the traffic enforcement capabilities of that group. Now, that's where traffic supplements. They aren't tied as heavily to the calls for service and can engage in that activity as can our strategic response unit. But still a lot of the traffic enforcement done is done by officers in their beat. So we do our best to balance it, but it's just the reality of some of our busiest times, and we push more staffing during those times, but that's still, it's a drain on resources during that time. I got a ground ball here. Next chat with the chief is tentatively going to be May 1st. Location to be announced soon. So thank you for asking that. Don, Don made a comment that maybe the penalties aren't high enough. I tend to agree. And my answer to questions like this are generally, and we have some great legislators in the area that are willing to listen. And this is going to be more our House of Rep folks, Illinois Rep folks, and Illinois senators. As the executive branch of the government, going back to the old school, how a bill becomes a law, legislative, executive, and judicial. We are the executive arm. We do make recommendations or we work very closely with our elected officials when they do hear from the residents about ideas. So these are the types of things you should bring up to them that, yeah, maybe the accountability isn't high enough to get people to drive safely. I tend to agree. And I think you both would agree that sometimes it might need a little bit more serious consequences. with that. I also have, to the person asking about the 2024 traffic crash data, that wasn't me, because it gives me a chance to plug our website. So if you go to our data map, we have all that there. I will definitely get this posted again on social media for you. But it's readily available on a daily basis, all our crash data, because we just released our 2024 crime stats. So you can go onto our website, and that exact slide is part of our 2024 crime stats on our website. Will you be bringing Saturday enforcement into town? We enforce the best we can 24/7, 365. I think that's what you mean. So we do make traffic stops on the weekends too. I promise you that. And we have a comment on West Street. We spend a lot of time on West Street. Derek, I think you can affirm that. I know I see a lot of traffic officers, even when I'm out jogging in the community, parked over there on West Street and stopping vehicles. So. All right, everybody, thank you so much again for spending time with us. Look for more webinars in the future. We found this to be a pretty effective way to meet with our community members about different issues. And if there's something you'd like to hear about in the future, we're always taking that feedback. So don't be shy about reaching out and asking. And to my two fellow panelists, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy days to help me. It's always great to hear from the chief, but sometimes it's even better to hear from those out there and kind of leading our charge on how to keep our roadways safe. So Derek, Andy, thank you very much for spending time with us. Stay safe, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.